everybody, and welcome to Everywhere Book Festival. My name is Aida Salazar, and I am going to be moderating today's panel on home and belonging with some very special, fabulous authors who have written stories about immigration. So I'm going to start by introducing myself and my book. This is my book. It's called Land of the Cranes, and it's a book that I wrote about a little girl who is a migrant, and she believes she's a bird, and she believes that all migrants should be free to fly as cranes. And she gets into a little bit of trouble when her family gets swept up into an immigration raid and then into a detention center. And she writes picture poems to her family and to her father, who's been deported to Mexico while she's detained. And that's Land of the Cranes. So how about Kelly?
Hi guys, I'm Kelly Yang. I'm the author of Front Desk and the sequel to Front Desk, which is 3 Keys, coming out in September. And Front Desk, if you guys remember, is about a 10-year-old immigrant girl, Chinese-American girl, Mia Tang, who manages the front desk of a motel while her parents clean the rooms. And 3 Keys continues the story of Mia. She and her friend Lupe have to navigate a really interesting changing environment in California. There's an election and an immigration law that can threaten everybody in Mia's life and everything she's worked hard to build. Thanks, guys.
And my name is Ernesto Cisneros, and I am the author of Up and Divided. And it's a story of a 12-year-old boy whose life is turned upside down when his mother is deported and he's left fending for himself and for his little brother and sister in hopes that his mom will soon be returned.
Hello, I'm Jameelah Syed Mendez, and I'm the author of On These Magic Shores. And this is a story about a girl who wants to be the first Latina president of the US, and she has a plan set up to achieve her goal, but everything falls apart when her mom goes missing, and her mom is an immigrant to the US.
All right, so those are our fabulous panelists. And now we're going to be able to hear them read from their books, and including myself. And I'm going to read to you a piece. See, my book is in verse, and you'll see that it's in verse. That means that it's written as a series of poems and in novel form. And I am going to read one poem from this book. And it's a moment where this young character, my main character, Betita, is just waking up on a Saturday morning at home. It's called Jelly Ranchera Strides. From my cushy bed, Saturday morning sounds are a blast of rancheras swooshing into our house, leftover music from Omar's ritual car wash, and El Paletero's bell ring, ring, ringing, and Papi's calling, "Para arriba, Betita Plumita, los 15 de Tina are today." I squeeze my ojos shut, but my ears are too net, snatching more sounds. The tiny cackle of Amparo's baby brother and the fart noises I know she makes by catching air in her armpits make me giggle before Papi tickles my toes really awake. I tumble out of my blankets, follow the smell of huevitos and cafe coming from the kitchen, thinking about Tina, my cousin, and her round yellow dress. I run into Papi, spinning Mommy away from the stove. He tucks her into a cheek-to-cheek two-step ranchera, then pulls me into a close snug. I bury my face into Mommy's squishy belly, feeling my mouth stretch into the sappiest jelly grin as I bounce along to their two-step ranchera strides. And that's them. I see, let me see. Can you see them? That's Betita and her family. That's her at home. Kelly, do you want to read from your book?
Yes, I'm going to be reading from 3 Keys, and this is chapter 1. Chapter 1. A very wise person once told me that there are 2 roller coasters in America, one for the poor and one for the rich. I've only been on one of those roller coasters, and I thought I was never going to get off. But as I watched my best friend Lupe decorate the Cala Vista Motel pool with silver and gold lights, a smile stretched across my face. The lights were the kind you put up at your house at Christmas. Even though it was the middle of August and the summer sun beat down on us, it sure felt like Christmas. We were owners now. We had bought the motel from Mr. Yao, and we were finally going to run it our way. A little to the left, Mrs. T, one of the weeklies, called, pointing to the barbecue at the pool sign. She and the other weeklies, Hank, Mrs. Q, Fred, and Billy Bob, were also helping set up. They were regular customers at the motel, but they were so much more. They were family. Hank smiled at the sign. The barbecue was his idea. It was part of his friendlier and warmer rebranding of the Cala Vista, and it was going to be delicious. We were having Hank's tangy sweet baby back ribs, Fred's corn on the cob, and my mom's fried rice. Hank adjusted the sign, and we all stood back to admire it. Lupe's dad, Jose, gave a holler and a thumbs up from the roof. I smiled back at Jose. Ever since we took over the motel, he'd been working almost exclusively at the Cala Vista, which meant that I've gotten to hang out with Lupe all summer long. My mom rushed from the manager's quarters with a huge cooler full of ice, with my dad trailing after her. "Don't take that out so early," Dad cautioned. "The ice is going to melt." My mom placed the cooler beside the table with the napkins and the drinks. "Then I'll just run out and get some more," she said. You'd think that now that we were making more money, my parents would stop bickering, but every morning my dad still pours the cooking oil he saved from the previous night's dinner into the breakfast pan, saying, "Don't waste" in Chinese. And he still pulls a square from the toilet paper roll to wipe his nose instead of using a Kleenex. It's like he still doesn't believe any of this is real, that if he doesn't save every penny, it'll all disappear. I walked over to the white plastic pool chairs where my dad sat and bent down next to him. "We're on the good roller coaster, Dad," I told him. "Things are going to change. They're going to be different. You'll see."
Okay, so I'm going to be reading a piece of F Undivided, and I thought I'd, since the theme of today's episode here is home, I want you to introduce you a little bit to Efren's home. Once again, Efren Nava woke to a chubby pajama foot in his face. He squinted at the bright yellow rays, peeking into the broken window blinds, and looked to his left. But it wasn't Mia's foot. She was fast asleep, cuddled at the edge of their mattress with the same naked plush doll whose clothes she'd taken off and lost a long time ago. He looked to his right. Sure enough, the foot belonged to Max. How Max managed to roll over Efren during the middle of the night was beyond him. Efren shook his head and sighed, but then he caught sight of a tiny hole in the right foot of his little brother's flannel onesie. Smiling, Efren licked the tip of his pinky and gave a wet willy to Maxie's pudgy toe. Efren covered his mouth and stifled his laughter as the sleepy Max pulled away his leg. However, the victory didn't last long. Max spun around in his sleep and planted the other foot in Efren's face. There was no way to win. Efren yawned himself fully awake before turning to his parents' side of the room. Once again, Appa was gone. No sign of his heavy jacket or scuffed up work boots by the front door either. It seemed no matter how early Efren tried getting up, he just couldn't catch Appa getting ready for work. Amma was the same way. She never slept in. Any minute now, she'd wake up, unwrap her blankets, and go right to the kitchen to make breakfast. There was a pot full of leftover frijoles from last night's dinner, and that meant she would for sure be making fresh sopes this morning, Efren's favorite. But before that, Efren had something important to do. He lifted Max's leg by the pajamas and got up careful not to disturb Mia, who'd now snuggled close to Max. Efren stepped over the pair of pint-sized legs and arms blocking his path. He wasn't sure which was worse, sharing a mattress with two kindergartners or sharing a bathroom. Their apartment was really one big room, so the only place he could find peace and quiet was the bathroom. Efren looked in the mirror, wincing as he removed the tiny strips of tape, pinning back his ears against the sides of his head, an idea he came up with after repeatedly hearing Amma warn the little ones against making funny faces. "Sus caras se les van a quedar así," she'd say. "Their faces freezing?" That's exactly what Efren counted on. It was only a theory, but if it were even slightly true, he guessed the same would apply to their ears. If he could manage to tape back his ears often enough, they too would eventually freeze and finally stop sticking out. All he had to do was make sure they folded in just the right way for a few more weeks, and presto, normal ears that didn't stick out like the knobs on Frankenstein's neck.
Excellent. I'm going to be reading from chapter 1 of On These Magic Shores. Chapter 1, Chasing Shadows. Peter Pan was an idiot. Only an idiot would wish to be a child forever. The play Peter Pan was for idiots. Practicing for it was for idiots. If I was going to be Wendy, the only important girl character in the play, I had to practice, even if I sounded the greatest idiot of all. 12 years old, and here I was, embarrassing myself in front of my baby sisters. They both sat quietly watching as I pretended my sister Coda's teddy bear was Peter Pan. But the bear's beady eyes, the simple smile, the binky with the yellowing silicone, it was too much for me. Let's pretend Peter's invisible, I said, tossing the bear aside. Or let's just talk to his shadow. There's plenty of shadows in this horrible place. Our moldy basement apartment smelled like a dungeon, and I was the prisoner. Coda's outraged gasp almost stopped me. Almost. I threw a blanket over the bear to keep it out of sight. Minerva Soledad Miranda, she said, her loose top front tooth flapping in and out with every breath she took. Why are you so rude? Our home is not horrible. It was Mama speaking through my 6-year-old sister. And don't be mean to Mr. Brownie. He can't breathe. I grabbed my hair and silently shouted, Don't call me Minerva. It's Minnie. Minnie, understood? I hissed and my throat hurt like I had shouted for real. I was frustrated, but not dumb. If we made a lot of noise and the neighbor, Mr. Chang, complained, Mama would be furious. I stood in front of Coda, relishing the feeling of being 2 heads taller than someone for once in my life. She pretended to be unfazed, but her cheeks turned bright red like Mr. Chang's unpicked apples in the backyard. At the first chance she had, Coda skipped away from me. Don't stare at my tooth, she said. It doesn't want to fall because the tooth fairy is scared of you. The tooth fairy? Fairies don't exist. I laughed. No, I mocked her. And to make her suffer even more, I added, besides, we don't get a tooth fairy. Remember, for us, it's the mouse, El Ratón Pérez. Mama insisted on us keeping the tradition from Argentina, where she'd grown up. I'd gone along because I hadn't known any better. Once I started school, though, and the other kids told me a fairy took their teeth and not a mouse, switching to the fairy had been a no-brainer for me. For Coda, who loved fairies with an irrational fervor, choosing a mouse over a fairy was inconceivable.
Oh, fantastic. So fantastic. So we have such a diverse group of realities. We have people who are new immigrants. We have people whose parents are immigrants, and in all of these different characters. And it's such a beautiful display of what the immigrant experience is, because I know that a lot of times we've been told that the immigrant experience is only one story. And all these different stories really kind of show us how diverse and how different they are. They're as different as there are people. And so thank you so much, everyone, for writing such important books. I want to ask you a few questions that I think your readers would really want to know. For you, you have your own immigrant experience, and sometimes making a home or defining a home is very difficult to do for immigrants. Sometimes we have very little money or resources. Sometimes we don't speak the language. Sometimes we're suffering because of what we left behind, because our original home was too difficult or too scary or too threatening to be. And so I want to know how your families, or if you want to talk about your characters in your book, created a sense of home when they arrived to the United States.
Yeah, so I'll start first, I guess. So yeah, absolutely. As a first-generation immigrant, I came over from China with my parents when I was 6 years old. And I left all my cousins and all my friends and all my relatives. It was really, really hard. I did not expect a lot of the stuff that happened, including struggling through poverty for much of my childhood, pretty much my entire childhood. So it was really hard to find that sense of home. And I think that what we did as a small family unit, just the three of us, my parents and I, was that we sort of had to look internally to each other for that safe feeling of home, because we were moving around so much. I moved to like 8 different schools for 8 different grades. And in some of those places, I was the only Chinese girl. And it was like crazy. It was a really scary, it was a really strange childhood growing up. But there was a lot of joy and there was a lot of wonder. And I think that it pretty much for us, it was really just like, no matter where we are, if we're together and we love each other and we're together as a family, then we can provide that sense of home, even if we're constantly on the move.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I'd love to know in a little while, if I can, I'll come back and ask you this question, the notion of wonder. I really like that. And I'll ask you later to talk a little more about it, and maybe everybody else can too. Ernesto, you were going to begin?
For me, the experience is a little bit different. I was the second generation. My parents are the ones that came over. And for us, the experience of home was, we were very fortunate to be able to get a home early on. So I always felt like I had a home, but the thing that was difficult for us was I never saw my parents growing up. It was my sisters and I home alone. My parents wouldn't come home till about 8, 9 o'clock every night. And so as times got better, they started, we started spending more time together. But we always made sure that it was about the family, and we didn't have very much money. But when I think back to all the fond memories I have, I remember spending the whole summer, and then the living room was one of those swamp coolers with the water. And it was so hot that we would all sleep together. And it was kind of like, it's almost like going camping, except we did it in our living room. So all those things are, to me, I always felt like when I think of home, that is my home experience. And it didn't matter that, we didn't have a bed, or if somebody, sleeping on a mattress, that kind of stuff didn't matter at all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, for me, the experience was a little different because I came to this country as an older teenager by myself when I came to the US to attend college. So I come from a very humble family in Argentina, a family also of immigrants. My grandparents and great-grandparents came from several different parts of the world: Italy, Spain, Yugoslavia, which is a country that doesn't even exist anymore. And my family were very supportive of me, and they were very excited that I had the chance to come to the United States to go to school. So the family that I made here when I was by myself was the friends, other students like me. They were on their own, everybody with their own different languages and traditions and cultures. And we helped each other out because we knew what everybody else was feeling, especially for the holidays. I arrived the weekend of the Easter weekend, and I missed my family so much just right off the bat. But having other friends in my same situation made it a little easier for me. And a few years later, my family moved to the United States too, and that was one of the happiest moments of my life, that I could be with them again, and I could celebrate the holidays and celebrate special moments with them. But those friends that I made as a 19-year-old are still such a big part of my life, and we still talk to each other pretty much every week, even now, more than 20 years later.
Well, that's wonderful. Well, so different. Kelly, you have a book about
parachutes.
Yeah, but you should talk about that just briefly, because I think that's a really beautiful segue there.
That's so funny. Yeah, I wrote a book about these kids who come from Asia, and they're coming on their own to study in the US. So they're immigrating on their own, and they have to figure out who they are and their place in this foreign country. And it's really hard. I think it's like so super extra hard if you're doing this without your parents. And you have to figure all of this stuff out on your own, and you have to find your core group of friends. And sometimes that's just, you can get into all sorts of situations. I remember, even as a teenager, going to college, going to law school, it was really hard on my own.
Yeah. Well, my experience is a little bit different. I was born in Mexico, in a small pueblo in Zacatecas, and my parents immigrated when I was 9 months old. And so I really have not known any other home. My parents came with a tourist visa for the whole family, and then they outstayed their visa. They were following the American dream because they had very little opportunity in Mexico. And so when we arrived, I was 9 months old, and one of my sisters, the one right after me, was born at 3 years later, and because of her, we were able to apply for citizenship, and we didn't get our green card until I was about 12 years old. So my whole childhood I spent undocumented, and that meant that we couldn't legally cross the border to go see family, and that created a lot of stress. And even though we had this kind of conditional permission to cross during those times, we were terrified of La Migra, which is the border patrol, and because we knew that they could tear our family apart. And that's something that I lived with for a really long time, until even after we got our green cards, we knew that one mistake could deport us. And so it's been a really interesting experience. I'm now a U.S. citizen, but it was really difficult to consider myself fully home until I was, a citizen, and I didn't get my citizenship until 5 years ago. So home has always been kind of like this fluctuating thing. Sometimes I felt safe, but many times I didn't.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I mean, just because, even though my parents came on, I think, some sort of school visa or something like that, in which they then transferred into some sort of employment visa. I remember going with my mom every year to immigration services. It was called INS back then. And you'd have to sit in this big long line at like the crack of dawn, because there were like 1 million people. And then we'd wait and wait and wait until you got your turn to go before, the big white man who was going to either reject or accept your application to extend your visa. And so my mom would always say to me, like, try to look cute. Like, I was like, what does that mean? And she'd be like, try to look like the kind of immigrant that they want. And I'm like, what? What is that supposed to mean? And I was so terrified every year waiting in this line. And as we got closer and closer, my heart just was about to like explode, even though we were legally here. But the difference between being here legally and being here, quote unquote, illegally, it's just like one man and his decision, and whether he woke up on the right side of bed that morning, and he had so much power. And it was an intense childhood going through that experience. And then the other thing I will say is I recently immigrated back to the US. So I was living in Hong Kong for the last 15 years. And even though I'm an American citizen, and my husband's American citizen, when I immigrated back with my kids, it was sort of like late January, and they had just cut off the border to China. And I was coming from Hong Kong, which we didn't have, coronavirus cases. They were really very much under control in Hong Kong. But I was really worried about being turned away, even though I'm an American citizen. So like that fear, like never really fully leaves you, no matter what your citizenship status.
Yeah, for sure. And there, and the laws change every year, and depending on the administration, and like right now, many immigrants are feeling a lot of fear, even with their status. So yeah, it's absolutely true. So I have another question, maybe that we can ask our readers. what can immigrant readers do to help them find a sense of belonging, a sense of home, and what can others do to help immigrants feel like they belong?
Does somebody else want to go first?
Well, as a teacher,
Jamie, how about you? Or
Oh, Ernesto started. You can go ahead, Ernesto, and then I'll add.
I just want to briefly, as a teacher, I have a lot of students that are undocumented. And I think the greatest thing that students can do is to just embrace everybody and let them know that and give them that sense of home. Because sometimes kids are reluctant to, if you're not here and you're worried about being deported, you're not going to want to try out for the stay after school. Those are the kids that tends to be very, just very frightened. And so they go home as soon as the bell rings. And when you don't participate in society and you don't do things that are like sports and clubs and things like that, you just never really get that sense of home. So I think if you just try your best to include everybody, it makes a huge difference to them.
Yes, going along with that, I want to say that one of my very best friends to this day was a girl back then who invited me to my first Thanksgiving here in the United States. I lived with roommates, and some of them went back to their families. Some of them lived close to the university and they went to celebrate with their families. And I was alone at home for the holiday. And this friend of mine, she's from Mexico, and she lived nearby with her whole family. And they invited me to this enormous Mexican Thanksgiving. That was one of the greatest Thanksgivings that I've ever attended. And that made me feel a little like she was sharing her family with me. And she was teaching me the ways of this country, because I had never celebrated this holiday. I didn't know what it was about other than what I had seen on TV. So I was super grateful that she gave me the opportunity to experience my first big holiday in the United States, and that she was my friend immediately, although before we hadn't really known each other very well. And we continue our friendship to this day. So sometimes just being a good friend can go a long way in making other people feel welcome. Never underestimate the power of a kind word or a smile, or just noticing that this other person is there next to you in your classroom or in the playground. A smile can go a long way.
I want to just get us to kind of wrap up our last question, if we can answer it just briefly, because our time is coming to an end, unbelievably, because I feel like I could talk to you guys forever. What made you want to write about immigrant kids and families?
I wanted to capture, my childhood and normalize it, because I felt really different from everybody else growing up. I felt that where I lived and the things that I cared about were not being talked about, by any of my classmates, because they never read about immigration issues, or they never read about, living in a motel or something like that, right? Or parents working all the time. And I wanted to write about that so that kids growing up, when they grow up like that, they don't feel like this is not normal, and they actually feel really proud of it. And it's just something that, we're all coming from different backgrounds and different experiences.
Yes, to piggyback what Kelly just said, I feel the key word was normal. I always felt that my family was not normal. I actually really connect with your book Front Desk, because my family was Mia, because we always had uncles and tus tíos y tus tías, and as soon as one would come over, they would stay with us, and I would always give up my room, and I would have to be sharing with people, and then they would leave, and I would think, all right, get my room back. And then somebody else, another tía, would come on over. I remember one time I even took my mattress into the closet because I wanted to have my own room finally. But that was just the experience. So I always thought that my life wasn't, I grew up watching the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family, and I thought that was normal. And just the narrative has always been that that's what a normal American family is like. And I wanted to change that a little bit and say, no. My experiences are just as normal and just as valid as everybody else's.
Yes, and on the other side of the coin, I wanted to show that although sometimes for children whose family comes from another country and they have different circumstances, childhood is a magical moment that is shared by humanity as a whole. And like you were asking earlier, you asked Kelly about that sense of wonder. In my book, I feel like my character, her story arc is that she finds that magic of being a child, and she finds it in everyday things, that it doesn't have to come from a magical creature. And I guess I wanted to show that in spite of the circumstances, there can be magic and wonder in a child's life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's what all of these have in common, all of these different books. I haven't read Three Keys, but I've read the others. And I think that it's true, because we're writing in middle grade, we, I think, have to deliver that. And I think readers, you have to remember that you're still a child, and no matter how difficult and how scary things might get, you're still a child, and you still have the power to imagine and to dream. And with that, I wanted to invite you guys to write with us. So your turn to write with us. We would like for you to follow some prompts and then send them back to us. So we have our first prompt.
Yeah, so the first prompt, we want you to write a poem or a story or draw a picture where the main character is new to a place they call home. They could be in a new town, they could be in the same town and move to a new part of the town, or they could be in a new country, a different place that they call home.
And for the next prompt.
And for the second one, we would like you guys to write a poem or a story or draw a picture where the main character finally feels like they belong. So it's kind of like the way same question that we were addressing. What are those characteristics that make you feel like you belong? And be sure to use a lot of those specific details about the meals and the traditions and the customs and things that make you those memories special to you.
Yeah. So since this is a pre-recorded video, you can pause and go back and view the prompt. But we want you to please send us your work, and we will post it on social media. So that's our information right there. And well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Ernesto. Thank you, Jameelah, for joining us on this brief and wonderful discussion about immigrants in the United States and in middle grade. So we will see you next time, and I hope that you will send us your work and that you stay safe during the pandemic, and that you read books and continue to imagine and dream and believe in yourself. Thank you so much. On behalf of the Everywhere Festival, take care, everyone.